So today we're here to see Errol Flynn, and Errol is buried up here in front of the Freedom Mausoleum. So you walk up here to the George Washington statue, and Errol is through this little doorway here. So there are a couple of famous people on our way, one being Spencer Tracy over here. And who we came to see is this statue right over here. What a character this guy was. He would not be happy he's buried here, that's for sure. He did not want to be buried in Hollywood. He wanted to be buried in Jamaica. He enjoyed it there, but he had won a hotel and a card game, so he'd been making his living there for quite some time and always wanted to be buried there. I don't think he intended on dying in Vancouver when he did, so here's the grave of Errol Flynn. June 20th, 1909 to October 14th, 1959, in memory of our father from his loving children. And then this was his third wife, Patrice Wymore Flynn, and she was the reason that he's buried up here, apparently. Said that despite the fact that he wouldn't want to, she decided to bury him up here. And his last girlfriend, Beverly, even though he had proposed to her, wasn't legally his wife because he had met her when she was 15. So Errol Flynn, he was originally Tasmanian. His father was the head, or like the first teacher of biology in Tasmania, and he was an explorer himself, so he would go out and find fossils and bones and things like that for the museum there. So Errol would go out and do that a lot with him, so that gave him his sense of adventure. His mother did not like Tasmania. She was apparently not faithful, would cheat on Errol's father often, and then Errol's father got to a point where he cheated on her. So Errol never really saw a healthy relationship, and therefore never really envisioned himself having one. Now his life was pretty fascinating because he was expelled and kicked out of every single school he ever attended, stopped his education, I believe at the age of 15. He would at one point be with his father and mother in Tasmania, and then they would separate, so he would go live in Sydney, and it was during the Depression, so he was having a hard time finding a job. And one day, laying on the beach, a film director saw him and thought that he could make Errol a star, and so he put him in a silent movie version of what would be basically the Mutiny on the Bounty story. And Errol had pretty much no acting ability at all. Nothing ever came of it. But he loved the idea of being a sailor, so he begged everybody he knew for money and ended up buying his first sailboat, and then talked 3 of his friends into sailing to New Guinea with him. It was a 6-month journey, and he would do that several times throughout his life, go back and forth. But he ended up going back and liking it, and became somewhat of a trader. Like, he would trade, they said, illegal feathers. Big surprise there. And he would give tours of the area on his boat, and then eventually came back to Sydney where he was, and was trying to find another line of work because he basically was breaking so many laws. Tasmania, he thought they were getting on to him, so he got out of there before anything had happened. When he came back to Sydney, he met a wealthy socialite, basically, who was having a big party and wanted some young people there. So she hired him and some of his friends to attend. And he ended up within a week moving in, sleeping with her, and then stealing a bunch of her jewelry, and found out that the police were chasing after him. So he and his, basically a mentor named Herman Urban, guy who was much older than him, and he would kind of look at as a father figure, they went off on adventures for the next couple of months, carousing, and then decided to go over to America to see if Errol could make it in movies. And while he was on the boat, he met the woman he was gonna marry, who was already a big star in France. He was immediately smitten with Lily Demita, but he probably never saw himself ever settling down from his family history. And even though he married her, she knew from the time that he got his movie deal that she was in trouble. She helped him get his foot in the door with just like some odd jobs at Warner, and people saw him there and then went to do a screen test, and Jack Warner ended up giving him a contract and putting him in a big budget movie that they were doing at the time called Captain Blood with Olivia de Havilland. He had never really done anything before this, and when they premiered the movie, he was an overnight success. And her friends said they could see her at the premiere crying, and when they went up to her, they said, "What are you upset about? He's gonna be a star. I mean, he is a star, an overnight sensation." She said, "That's what I'm afraid of. I've already lost my husband." So they would end up being married for 7 years. He would basically cheat on her most of the time throughout this, and they had some knockdown, drag-out wars. They would get into fights, and she would throw plates and rough him up, and he like thought it was funny. He liked that kind of life and just loved living on the edge. Plus, she didn't make him really do anything as far as being faithful. He could go off and do basically anything he wanted, and he did have a child with her before they ended up divorcing. And unfortunately, his son was a photographer in Vietnam and went missing. So during his marriage to her, the Spanish Civil War broke out, and he just decided he wanted to go and see it. So he took time off of work, and he and Herman Urban took off to see the Spanish Civil War together and photograph it. And Errol always wanted to be a writer, so he was looking at this as a way that he could write about this. And what ended up happening was, eventually when they finally made their way back, Errol didn't know it, but Herman Urban was, even though he was Jewish, he was a Nazi, and he was a spy. And all the photos that he took that Errol thought he was going to be able to use for his book, Herman ended up turning them in and got a lot of people prosecuted for the Spanish War. And so that was where they said that the kind of the rumor that Errol was a spy came from, but he had nothing to do with it. He had no idea that Herman was doing that. That was his intention. So he always had that sense of adventure, and since he couldn't enlist in the military, he had tried. That was one of the things that always bothered him. He was always portrayed as this hero. He was Robin Hood. He was, you know, a pirate, a swashbuckler. He was all these heroes, and yet he couldn't get into the military. He couldn't serve when the time that the country needed people. He tried, and every branch of the military turned him down. Apparently what he didn't know, and what nobody was telling him, was that he had an enlarged heart, he had tuberculosis, and even though he would be like a vision of beauty and would be almost like the model of fitness on the outside, his insides were horrible. So when he got his divorce from Lily, that's when he decided to build the Mulholland Farm, which is the house at the top of Mulholland that Rick Nelson bought, and that Gunnar was telling us had all kinds of secret passages and places that you could go in above Errol's bedroom and look down through secret glass and see everything that was going on in the bedroom. Now that kind of leads me to a story, because this is when his womanizing days really ramped up at this house. There were said to be orgies, all kinds of debauchery going on. But while he was living there, he started dating my friend Shelley Winters. Shelley was invited by Errol and Clark Gable to go on a double date with Yvonne DiCarlo. And so Clark came over to Shelley's house, picked her up, met her parents and everything, and then took her to the party. While they were there, Clark was dancing with Shelley, and all of a sudden Errol comes up and tries to cut in, and they start fighting. And Shelley said somebody whisked her away while Errol and Clark were about to get in this fist fight, and they took her home. And the next day she got a call from Errol Flynn saying, "Look at the cover of the newspapers, you're a star, darling, we made you a star." And she said, "What?" He said, "Oh yeah, we did all that just to get your name in the paper. We figured if Clark Gable and Errol Flynn had a fist fight over a woman, somebody would want to talk about it." And she started dating Errol Flynn basically from then on, because they had a real date after that, and I'll tell you about that. So after that party, she went on that double date with Yvonne DiCarlo, Clark Gable, and Errol Flynn, and at some point, Yvonne says she has to go to the bathroom and tells Shelley to come with her. And when they go in there, she says, "Who do you want? Which one do you want?" Shelley said, "Oh, I thought they would pick." She said, "No, we get to pick. Which one do you want?" She said, "Why don't you go with Errol?" She goes, "Everybody's had their chance with Clark. You can have Clark anytime." So Shelley told me, she said, "So basically I got pushed off on Errol, which I wasn't sad about because he was a very beautiful man." She said he had almost blonde hair because he was always out sailing every day when he wasn't filming. And she said that's what their life consisted of. She said she could always remember the white silk satin sheets that he had on his bed, and she said she looked up and could tell that there was a mirror up there, so she kind of figured that there was a two-sided mirror just with his reputation in town. But she said she would go off and go sailing with him and things like this while he lived up there. And yeah, that was kind of a crazy story, but that was while he was living up there. He had apparently taken a photo with a 15-year-old girl. Like, he didn't know she was 15, and they put it in Life magazine, and then she eventually found a lawyer and went to the lawyer saying that Errol Flynn had taken advantage of her as a youth, you know, that she was underage and everything. And then another girl came out, and so Errol was now going on trial and had to get a lawyer. He had got the best lawyer in town, the most expensive lawyer in town, Jerry Giesler, because apparently at the time most of the studios paid off the police and they paid off everybody in town so that nothing would ever happen. But Jack Warner and Errol Flynn had a really kind of crazy, tumultuous relationship, because even though Jack Warner made him a star, he wouldn't let him do anything but hero pictures, and Errol got tired of it, and a lot of times would just decide he wasn't going to show up, or he was going to show up a couple of days late for the filming and make them apologize. And so when this happened, the studio wasn't paying anyone off, and Errol had to go through with it. So he was accused of, you know, basically being with two underage girls. And they even said during the trial, when he's fighting and having his lawyer basically defame these girls, take apart their character and everything, he smuggled an underage Mexican actress into Hollywood and up to his house while this was going on. And then when basically the girl's character was completely ripped apart, he won the trial and then asked out the cigarette girl, who was only 18 at the time, Nora Eddington, asked her out on a date, and she got pregnant the first night that she went up to the Mulholland Farm. Nora said, "I knew what he was about, and with me getting pregnant and him proposing, I did agree to marry him, but she said, I told him, I know that you're a carouser, just don't do it in front of me, don't bring it home." And she said over the 6 years, she ended up having a second child, and she said he did not honor her wish. Very often he would bring the girls to the house or humiliate her, so she couldn't stay with him. She eventually got tired of it and left him, and then he found another woman, another actress, who was Patrice. So he found Patrice, and at the time he had such a bad reputation in America, he couldn't really get much work, so he basically lived like a gypsy and was traveling around Europe and trying to find work, and would work in just about anything that anybody would hire him for. And then when he couldn't get any work, he ended up coming back to Hollywood, and Jack Warner gave him a chance. Jack Warner decided to put him in roles where he was a drunk. So for 3 straight pictures, Errol would basically play himself and did a great job, and actually was nominated for an Academy Award before it was mysteriously withdrawn. So at the end of his life, he really couldn't even make a living. He was having trouble. Lily, he owed money to ever since the first marriage, their divorce, and anytime he missed a payment or anything, she would put him back into court, coming after more money. So he ran out of money, basically ended up giving her the Mulholland farm and letting her sell it to get her money. And then, as much as he didn't want to, he was in love with a girl named Beverly, who again was a minor, and they apparently got along great, but he was out of money, so he had to sell his yacht. So that's why they went up to Vancouver, even though he had struggled with all kinds of back pain and had had heroin addictions and things like that. He went up there and was supposed to meet with a man about buying his yacht, and was in pain and called a doctor. The doctor gave him a shot. Then Beverly said a couple hours later he was sleeping, and she looked over and he felt clammy, and she could tell that he was dead. He had never really talked about it, but he had had several heart attacks when he was a young man, and suffered another one that ended up taking his life. So now the Mulholland farm is gone, which was his, you know, basically his castle here in town. He's buried where he didn't want to be. But he's a screen legend, and almost more of a legend for the life he lived off the screen, which is kind of crazy considering he was a hero in just about every part he played. He is the true thing of Hollywood stories. Rest in peace, Errol Flynn. Thank you everyone for watching. We will see you next time. Have a great night, and goodbye.